So the year is 2019, and I started getting more involved with the developer communities online. And I started engaging and following people on Twitter, leaving comments. And like many others, I just started to start my own technical blog. I wrote a couple of articles and I published them on a community technical blog called Hashnode. Has anybody heard of Hashnode? Yeah, okay, a few nods, great. And so I published them on Hashnode, hoping that others would find my content and that it would be useful. And the Hashnode community itself was great. People who frequented the site would find my content, they would read it, they would leave comments, and it was awesome. But I noticed that I wasn't getting any traction from Google. And my understanding that as a blogger, my job was to write content and then Google would just kind of like funnel people into my blog. And that's just how it worked. It was like magic, right? Now, I even made sure, and Hashnode helps with this, that I had high scores across the board on Lighthouse, right? And so still, people weren't finding my content and my articles weren't being read. And it was actually quite mysterious at the time. Well, a few months later, and the world shut down due to COVID-19, and I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. I wasn't driving to work anymore. I was working remotely, a few extra hours in the day. And so I decided to start investing in myself, investing in blogging, learning SEO, learning about Google specifically. And I even built my own site from scratch. I migrated all my content from Hashnode onto my own domain. So that way I could own my content. I was in full control over what was happening on my site. And after about a year of tinkering and dedicating my free time to my blog, I discovered that getting people to read my content wasn't actually that mysterious, or at least not as much as I initially thought. It actually was pretty straightforward. And there's many expensive SEO courses out there and even services and consultants, but I'm not an SEO expert. I'll just say that up front. But that's the point, right? The point is that if I can do this and if I can get people to my blog, and I've done this a few times now, if I can do it, you can do it too. Well, hey, my name is Braden Coyer. I am a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a senior front-end developer working at a company called Logic Gate based in Chicago. I'm very passionate about front-end development, and I love to learn from people and to also hopefully teach others through online articles, videos, and even communities like this here in person. I've managed to accumulate over 1 million clicks from Google in less than 100 articles on my site. And I've achieved success on my own domain and other domains as well over the years. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I know after lunch, it's a hard spot. The food was great. My goal today is to provide you with a game plan that simplifies what experts, SEO experts, have seemingly made complicated. And my aim is to give you a basic understanding of how Google works, how to find topics to write about, and how to write content and structure your articles that naturally attract readers. Now, there's no like magic involved with what I'm going to be sharing with you today. It's all very tangible. It's practical. And so if you invest time in your blog and you invest in writing, you will likely see an increase in readership. Well, here's the kind of table of contents of the structure of our presentation today. We have a lot to talk about. And so at the end, I'll be handing out a packet. I have them up here. Hopefully there's a copy for everybody. But it acts as hopefully a roadmap for you if you want, just an outline of what we're going over today, because I know there's a lot. It's going to be hard to remember. I'll also have it recorded, but this can act as like a roadmap, maybe even a checklist if you want to, as you go home and maybe apply some of these concepts. Well, you'll be hearing a lot of this today and over the next few days, but it's really true and it deserves some time. I want to give a huge shout out to all the sponsors of that conference. And whether this is your first time here at that conference, or maybe you've been attending for years, you know that that conference is special. It's unique, and the community is engaging and supportive. And none of that would really be possible without the support of the sponsors here today. So please take some time. Check out the websites, figure out who these guys are, or even go out to the hall, and they're all out there, and just go introduce yourself and thank them for supporting that conference. Okay, so a few assumptions about what we're going to be talking about today. Number one, is that we're going to assume that we're starting a new blog. Now, if you already have a blog and you've already published some articles, the content we'll be covering today is still very applicable to you. But for our demo and for the presentation today, we'll assume that we're going to work towards a goal, and that goal would be starting from scratch, and you can even see number 3 here. Our goal is to achieve 60,000 page views per month on our blog. It's a concrete number. It's manageable. You can record it, right? That number is significant enough that it requires you want to celebrate it. If you hit 60,000, it's a milestone. You want to celebrate that. But it's not too daunting where maybe it'll take too much time, you'll lose interest, and maybe you'll fall off the writing wagon, right? Number 2, I skipped over number 2, but because of the context of that conference, I assume we're all very technical people. So we're going to be assuming that our area of writing is programming or technical content, okay? So just a few assumptions there. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 1. We're going to talk about SEO and then characteristics of Google. We're going to be focusing on 2 today, 2 characteristics, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before we do that, let's kind of hit on SEO first. So what is SEO anyways? SEO stands for search engine optimization. And many people talk as if SEO is a way to entice Google or to kind of like prod Google to like showcase your content to more people. And they shroud SEO in this this web of mystery and usually behind a paywall. But in reality, SEO is pretty simple, right? It's merely a way to evaluate a web page's optimization, its speed, and its versatility. Hopefully you guys can read it in the back. If I need to zoom in, let me know. It's good? Okay, cool. Zoom in. Let's see if we can do it. Is that increasing the font at all? Maybe a little bit? How's that? Okay, we'll try it. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so that's SEO. So is it important? Absolutely. SEO is important in a broad sense, but it may not be as important as you really think it is. So having 100% scores in Lightroom across the board, even though Lightroom is more of a diagnostic tool, won't magically make 100,000 people read your articles. It won't actually make 100 people read your articles, right? So you don't have to have a perfect score in Lightroom to start to have visitors frequent your site. Now, there are a few things that you should do, and it only takes a few minutes to do these. I've hit on a few of them here. Number 1, try and generate a sitemap. Sitemap is just a way for Google to understand the structure of your site. So as you start to publish more content, that's available in the sitemap. It's helpful for Google. Number 2, the Google Search Console. This one's one of my favorites, and I think you should do it. It only takes like 5 minutes to set up. And the same thing with all these. These are really simple. If you haven't done them before, there's plenty of tutorials, articles, videos online that'll walk you through it. But the Google Search Console is really informative because it gives you analytics on specific pages of your site related to search results. The Google Search Console also allows you to request indexing of new posts. So instead of waiting for Google to send out the crawlers to find your newly published posts, which it seems like it could take who knows how long, you can actually go ahead and submit that in the Google Search Console to request that indexing faster, and that's really helpful. Number 3, this one's pretty self-evident, but just check your content. And I think we all know this. Just make sure you're not posting any content with broken links. Make sure semantically your content is up to date and accessible to everybody. Okay, so let's move on now to these 2 pillars of Google. Again, these are things that I've noticed in my own experience. Google is huge, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But these 2, I think, are really important for what we're going to be talking about today. So characteristic number 1 is that Google favors authority and credibility. Now, Google is a multi-billion-dollar search tool in business, right? And if you're writing about things like health or fitness, Google really isn't going to showcase your content without trusting you as an authoritative source. And this makes sense, right? So my family has been sick for like 20 odd days. We're okay now. You can come up to me and talk to me. That's fine. But let's say I was to Google something about the dosage of Tylenol for my toddler. I probably wouldn't want to get that from a source that has like 1 article on it. It's a little sus, right? So I want to make sure that the content that I'm getting allows me the opportunity to make an opinionated decision, right? So, and the same is true about your content. It doesn't have to be about health or fitness or these these huge areas. Whatever you're writing about, you need to have authority in that area so Google sees you as a subject matter expert. Now, a little disclaimer here, this doesn't mean that you have to be an expert with what you're writing, but it does mean that you need to do your due diligence. So learn about something and then write content that's real and applicable. I was writing about content about like Next.js 12 when it first dropped, and I wasn't a subject matter expert by any means, right? It was dropped, I was learning like everybody else, but I was learning, I was applying that, and then I was hopefully teaching others, right, and providing helpful content. I found that Google was still showcasing my stuff in the search results, and people were finding my content. Okay, that's characteristic number one. Characteristic number two is that Google favors helpful content. And this is related, but be intentional with what you're writing. When I first started my blog, I chose to write solely about, and this was back on Hashnode, I chose to write solely about what I was like learning on that specific day. And that's totally fine if that's your goal. Like if you just want to write a blog just to write more, that's totally fine. But write with a purpose. Just know that if you're just writing about, hey, today I learned about this git command and I learned about this, that's fine, that's awesome. But it may not provide as much value as it could to people, okay? So there's a difference between writing for the sake of writing and writing that, number one, helps answer a question, and number two, is as informative as possible. So there are 5.9 million Google searches per minute. This is a pretty recent stat, and that's only going to continue to climb, right? So think about this in your own life. If you use Google, how much of the time do you use it to answer a question or to find information on a topic? Obviously you can use it for entertainment and things like that. But for me personally, informative subjects or answering questions, that's pretty high up there. So when I first started my blog, I was keeping a log rather than a blog, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it may not provide as much traffic as it could. So aim to be helpful, and you'll start to see some results. So that's chapter one, really brief. This one will also be brief, but foundational. Chapter two, the strategy to achieve our goal, or in this case, 60,000 page views per month. So how are we gonna do that? Number one is to define a niche, and I really am hesitant to use that word here because I feel like the niche bloggers kind of get a bad rap. But the underlying idea I think is really important. So there's a bajillion things that we could write about, countless topics. To ensure that we cater to Google, we have to keep in mind characteristic number one, that Google favors authority and credibility. So if we write about the best food in Austin, which I'm not saying is Interstellar Barbecue just down the road, but if we write about the best barbecue in Austin on a Tuesday, and then on Friday on the same domain, on our same blog, we write about the latest JavaScript framework, our net of content is like stretched way too thin, right? We're not helping our authority at all. We're addressing two very different subjects and failing to concentrate on content that's sufficiently similar to establish ourselves as subject matter experts. So to quickly convey authority to Google, we need to focus on an area of writing. Number two, after you've defined a niche, we have to establish the authority. And how do we do that? By writing a bunch of content in what I'm calling these article buckets. And an article bucket is merely drilling down into your niche, into a specific category that you can write multiple articles in. The more helpful articles you fit in this subsection, the more you'll see Google start to trust your content. Now, your goal here is to establish 3 buckets in your niche and then write 25 through 30 articles in each bucket. And yes, that's a lot of content and it takes time. But as you start to flesh out these core pillars of content in your writing domain, Google algorithms will begin to take notice and you'll start to see some traction. So now that you've defined a niche and you've identified your 3 content buckets, what kind of articles should you write? And this is a really valid question because there's various forms of writing that you could use, like comparatives and reviews and personal narratives and tutorials. And each form has its own purpose, but we want to engage and help readers. So, excuse me, remember, 30 articles per content bucket is a lot of writing. And the best way to, number one, establish authority, and number two, provide helpful content for the reader, is to answer a question that the user has. And this type of article I've noticed is sometimes coined like a like a response post or an answer article. But usually a response post is very straightforward. It consists of about 1,000 words, and it focuses on just a few main points. It's a great way to show Google that you know what you're talking about. You're there to help the reader and establish authority and quickly rank up your domain rating. We'll be going over response posts a little bit later on, but we've kind of covered the three main parts of our strategy to actually to reach our goal. We've identified a niche. We've man, is it dry in here? Goodness. We've identified that niche. Our 3 content buckets, that's really important. And then knowing what kind of articles that we're going to be writing. So chapter 3, and this is the fun part in my opinion, this is how we learn, or when we learn to find topics to write about. So identifying your 3 content buckets isn't enough to just start writing your articles. You could, but it's really going to be a waste of time because it's crucial to conduct research to understand what topics people are interested in. What are people searching for? And this step can really kind of make or break the success of your article. And so it makes sense. You'd want to invest time before you actually spend the time writing the article to know with a certain level of confidence that people will end up reading it. Now, whoever thought of keyword research, go ahead and raise your hand when I said that. Okay, a few people, right? And that's totally fine. That's awesome. What I've discovered that, and similar to many aspects in life, is that there's multiple approaches to achieve the same outcome. And so while this holds particularly true for Google as well and the content that it serves, we're not obligated anymore to like find 3 or 4 like keywords to sprinkle in through our article and in our headings and then cross our fingers and hope that we've done a good enough job that Google's gonna show people and that it ranks #1. There's other ways that we can do this. And I will say, and I know that's probably a little small, sorry, that there's nothing wrong with using like a keyword research tool to help you identify topics or things that people are wanting to learn about. But I found that these tools are really expensive. Has anybody ever used like SEMrush or other tools like that? It's expensive, right? It's crazy. And it provides value, but based on my personal experience, the estimates of like the amount of search volume for those keywords is like way off. It's way off. It's never accurate. And so this really makes it uncertain if you should use a suggested keyword. Are you going to have that amount of traffic? And how do you even balance that out or not? So we're going to be talking about alternative ways to find out what people are searching for. And it doesn't cost any money. So option number 1, and this may sound obvious, but one of the best ways to determine what people are searching for on Google is to use what Google is telling us what people are searching for, okay? So we can start with the search bar, and maybe you've done this. First, you want to actually identify your main area that you're writing in. So let's say that my niche is like Angular, and maybe I even be a little bit more specific and say Angular 17. So add that as your first part of your search, and then add a space, and then follow that immediately up with any character on the keyboard. And you'll notice here in the picture, you can see that Google will actually suggest various topics for you. This is a really great way to see what people are interested in and what people are searching for, because Google's telling you that's a suggested query to make, right? Your job at this point is to go through the list and try and identify any topics that fill and fit into your content bucket, okay? Not necessarily your niche, but your content bucket that you're writing. If something doesn't write or fall into your content bucket, just delete the letter and then add another one. You can go through the whole alphabet if you want. This will help you identify different topics, okay? Now, another helpful tool is to use common search phrases. I found this super helpful. So things like how to and why are and when does and best for and versus articles. If you can answer a question with one of those, these are just alternate ways to help Google kind of show you different areas of a specific topic, okay? Now remember that our site is just getting started at this point. If you have your own site, that's fine. If you've already started blogging. But we can't really compete with like really broad topics, right? Because we don't have the authority to do that. And so we want to stick with very specific topics to write about at first. We fill out those content buckets, we gain authority, and then we can start spreading out and tackling those larger topics. So once you see a topic suggestion that you think falls within your content bucket, go ahead and make the search, okay? And then we'll get into this part of the talk, which is identifying a knowledge gap. So now you've conducted your search, you should try and identify a knowledge gap on the search page. So in this context, a knowledge gap refers to a search query or a question that you've searched for that you can potentially rank for. Now, how do you determine if you found a knowledge gap based upon what you're seeing on the search page? Some of this is a muscle that you'll begin to develop as you continue to write more. But I've listed out a few things here that I think are really helpful. And if you see some of these, it's almost like, hey, okay, I can write about this and have some confidence that I'm going to be able to rank for it. So number one, if a forum link is in the top 3 results of your search page, that's almost like, that's like a gold nugget. It's like, wow, Google's showing me that for this specific question, it's directing me to a public forum where, you know, maybe there's a right answer or you have to sift through information. Google's letting me know that there's not an authoritative source writing about that to answer that question. And so if you see that, I would almost immediately take that and write about that topic. And maybe I don't know about it, that's fine. I can go to the forum, I can read, I can do my own research, come to a conclusion, and then write the article. Number 2, and very similar to number 1, if a social network link is in the top like 3 results, that's another great indicator that you could rank for that topic. I will make a query sometimes and I'll get a result for LinkedIn, which is great, but it's a public area. People will write, 500 words on a subject and it shows up on Google. That's cool. But I would take that and I would write an article and I would probably get number 1 for it, okay? Number 3, if an article is light on information, so this is probably what you're gonna see most of the time, is you're gonna make a search and then you're gonna see a ton of articles on that topic. So don't be dismayed if that's the case. You should actually go into the top 3 or 4 and click into them, read them, skim the content, and see if they're light on information. After reading it, like, can you identify if the author covered all aspects of that specific question? Are they doing a good job answering the question? Can you think of different ways or different aspects to answer it? You could still rank for that potentially, and it might be a good candidate. And then the 4th one here, and this really kind of depends on the area of your writing, but in the tech world, this happens a lot, is that if the top result is like over a year old, tech is changing so quickly that a lot of the times, unless the author is keeping the article updated, the content might be way out of date, even within 12 months time, right? And so it may not be providing as much value to readers anymore. And so you could go ahead and write your own article, make it up to date, provide more value and information to the reader. And there's a good chance you could rank in page number 1, maybe even taking that top spot. So that's how you might be able to identify a knowledge gap. But equally important is to recognize when a topic really may not be worth your time. Number 1, a source website. So I write a lot about Angular on my blog, and I find it extremely difficult to outrank angular.io, right? Because they are the authoritative source on Angular, and it makes sense. But what I found in those situations is that usually the question I'm trying to answer is too broad, and it's just directing to angular.io. So if I narrow that down a little bit, I may not get a specific page on their website, and maybe I can write a response post for that. Number 2, exhaustive knowledge. So if you make a search, you see a ton of articles, you go into the first 5 or 6, and these authors are doing their due diligence. They are putting in the work. They have long pieces of content. They've got images to help support their claims or their answers. In that case, it may not be impossible to rank for, but I think there's probably other like low-hanging fruit that you could pick first, build up that authority, and then maybe come back to this later on. And then number 3, if the topic's very broad, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about number 1. See if you can narrow that down a little bit more and see if you can find a knowledge gap. Okay, this one's one of my favorites because it makes so much sense. Option number 2, how do you find topics to write about? Use the people also ask. I don't know why I never really thought about this, but if you make a search, here I made a search for the Angular 17 async pipe. Look at this, like 2 articles down, Google's saying, hey, here's what people are also searching for. Cool, this is like nuggets, right? You want to use this. So see if any of those fit within your content bucket in your niche, and you could actually go ahead and make that search and then go through the same process of identifying if there's a knowledge gap in that area. I use this one all the time. It's really great. We don't have to like rely on keyword research tools either for this, because we already know that Google's validating that people are searching for this kind of stuff, right? Really helpful. Okay, so just as it's important to take the time to find topics to write about, to have that confidence that what you're writing about is going to be read by people. It's equally as important to ensure that you actually write helpful content and that the content you're writing is structured and formatted in a way semantically to improve your chances of winning positions on the results page. So chapter 4 here, how to write and structure your articles. We'll cover the structure of a response post, and we'll talk about methods to engage your readers and visitors, and maybe even hit on a few tips and tricks to get Google's attention and see if we can increase our chances for ranking and placement. Okay, we talked about it earlier. A basic response post, the anatomy of the article, generally consists of about 1,000 words, okay? And then, 4 or 5 main sections, that being the introduction, 2 or 3 main points of your article to help answer that question, and then a conclusion, okay? Now, you don't have to stick to this formula 100%. I've just found it very helpful. It's very easy to go down the list, fill those out, and then kind of have a basic response post pretty solid, right? So that's a basic anatomy of the post structure, but let's go into each of these a little bit more. Starting with the introduction, and the introduction is probably the most important part of your response post. You want to, number one, identify the problem that the reader is having, because that's the whole reason why they're there, right? You want to say, hey, here's the problem you're having. I've encountered this too, maybe. And then you want to summarize the answer for the reader. The reason why we want to do this is because it provides like instant value. They can already start to see, hey, this person knows what they're talking about. They've hit on some things that maybe I'm already thinking about. I'm going to keep reading and see what this article is about, okay? Your goal is to try and do this in 4 to 5 sentences, okay? So summarize the answer, make sure you hit on, here's the problem you're having, right? Now, here's something also really cool. After you've written your introduction, you've identified the problem, go ahead and select the text for the answer that you summarized and make the text bold, okay? By doing this, you're actually doing 2 things. Number one, first and foremost, is that you're directing the reader's attention to the summary right away. That means you're providing instant value for the reader. It increases their chances of reading on, right? And then number 2, you signal to Google semantically that the text is significant, increasing the chances of it maybe being used as a featured snippet. So have any of you seen like featured snippets on Google, right? These are awesome. And I actually find that I get more traffic to my site from a featured snippet than ranking number 1, because a featured snippet doesn't have to be ranked number 1 on a results page. So my click-through rate is way higher on a featured snippet. It's really interesting. Now, having said that, Google is always rolling out algorithm updates, right? And what I found is that over the last 6 months, there isn't as much emphasis on featured snippets. I've lost a lot of mine for whatever reason, but you kind of have this ebb and flow with Google where they'll remove something, they'll test it out, and they'll bring it back. So I still think that this is a good habit to get into, even if it's just to provide that instant value to your reader. Okay, so that's the introduction. Let's move on to the main post, right? Your goal here, 250 to 300 words per main post or main point, but don't limit yourself. If you need more time to fully address like a section of your article, that's okay. Just be cautious about adding unnecessary information. Like don't just add fluff to add fluff. Be succinct. Answer the person's question in the best way that you can, and then move on. Number 2, it can be a good idea to transition from one point to another, so that way it's not so stark if you're just starting a new content or piece of your article. Keep that flow good. And then number 3, pictures, video, other types of media can be good, so long as they're there for a purpose. I find a decent mix of like pictures and videos can be good if you make content on YouTube, for example. If you add pictures, just make sure obviously you're adding the correct alt text and you're making your content accessible to everybody. And then the conclusion. So as you may suspect, the conclusion is short and sweet. Your job is to summarize the entire article and then just like sign off. It's that easy, right? Okay, so you've written your intro, your main points, your conclusion. At this point, what I like to do is go back to my draft and then look for areas that I've written about where I can link between my content. So you're writing 100 articles approximately in your 3 content buckets at the beginning here. Each content bucket is related to your niche. So this means that inevitably you'll be writing about content that overlaps with another subject you've probably written about prior. So when this happens, go ahead and find that article and link to it, right? Your job is to like create this like web of connections on your site. This really helps Google understand the structure of your site, but it also showcases your credibility and say, hey, I'm writing a lot about this topic in different areas of my site. I've got credibility here. I'm a subject matter expert. Um, and then as a consequence, actually, people will just click on those links and then find more answers on your site, which is great. So that's kind of a byproduct. Now, don't go crazy with linking between your articles. Make sure that if you're going to add a link, it has a purpose. To just be aware of that. Okay, so live demo time. Hopefully this goes well. With any live demo, there's a big chance of failure, right? But my purpose here is to kind of take what we just saw and try and find topics to write about. And I'm going to do this pretty raw in the sense that I haven't done these searches before, and I want to be speaking out loud as I start to see things, and hopefully you can kind of see how I'm thinking about trying to identify these topics, okay? So the screen is extended, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, so number one, go ahead and open up an incognito tab, just so that way Google isn't influenced by any of your past search queries or what you like to search about and things like that. So no cookies or nothing, just go to Google, here's the search bar. And then like I said, point number one, and I should have this up, but this is covered in the packet that I was gonna give out. Don't forget these when you leave. But number one is to start with the main topic in your niche, for example. So let's say mine is, let's say Angular, and let's do, what should we search about? Accessibility. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of move this way as I look. So Angular accessibility, cool. We're getting Angular, Angular IO right at the front. An article from Material. Angular blog, build more accessible Angular apps, cool. Here's an article from Medium, interesting. So this looks probably too broad. I'm not seeing a lot of specific queries about this, at least on this results page. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a space, and then let's just do like a random letter, like T or something. Accessibility testing, interesting. Yeah. Sweet, thank you. So accessibility testing, tab index. Oh, this one might be interesting. Let's click on testing. Okay, so accessibility in Angular, build more. So we're getting a lot of those same results. So I might go back, and I saw tab index. Let's do that one. Okay, Wrangle. Yeah. Yep. Yep. It can be like if right now we're assuming that our blog is at like ground zero, then I would probably try and build some authority first before trying to tackle something like this. Plus, you're really not going to have like maybe an article called Angular accessibility. You could, and that'd be fine. Yes. Ooh, great question. Interesting. Yeah. So the question was, can we use like ChatGPT to help us find these topics to write about, or can we use it along the whole journey from finding topics to writing our content? Maybe. I'm sure you could. I have not personally done that. Now I know a lot of people are using ChatGPT to actually write their articles. So it's like AI generated articles, and they're just like dumping contents or dumping articles out, right? 30 articles a day. It's crazy. Um, from what I've heard from people who are doing that is that it kind of works, right? But maybe not all the articles that they're writing are actually like getting picked up by Google. So is it, it might take 10 times more articles to get the same amount of traction that you could with like, you know, let's say 100 articles. So if you write 1,000, you might get, yeah. Mhm. Right. Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, right. Yep, yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It can help you with like coming up with specific parts of your article. Although, so I've done that a few times too, and I found that actually basing my title off of exactly what my knowledge gap is based on a query, I found more success in. But that's just me personally. But there are some times where it just seems like out of nowhere, like I'll just add this like kind of bait click or clickbait title, and then boom, it like explodes, right? So I'm not saying you can't do that, but consistently, I'm finding more success doing something like this. So accessibility tab index. So we already do this. Yeah, we're still getting Angular. I have an idea for one, and something I'm really excited about. Angular signals. Has anybody played with Angular signals yet? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's try something like Angular signals. Okay. Interesting. So we get versus RxJS versus observables. Okay. NGRX. Actually, here's state management. That might be a good one since it's pretty specific. This one seems interesting though. Versus React hooks. And actually, where is it here? But in this, I also included like the helpful phrases to use. Like remember I said how to and why are and best of. A versus one could be interesting. Like you can answer the question, what are the differences between Angular signals and React hooks? So let's see what this one is. Okay, so actually super cool because we get a a featured snippet here. Signals can handle updates much faster and smoother than React hooks. What is the source for this? Sorry. LinkedIn. Oh, nice. So let's click into this actually because I'm interested to see. Okay, so we've got, this looks familiar. React hooks. Okay, so number one, this is on LinkedIn. Number two, there's not a whole lot of content here. I have to imagine that there's actually more content I could write about the difference between React hooks and signals. And so this might be one that I search for or that I use. I could write an article on. But let's see what number two is. Number two is LinkedIn. Number three is React use state versus Angular signal. Oh, this one is React. So I assume that this is the author and they probably posted on LinkedIn. But here's the people also ask. So this one's also cool. What's the difference between Angular signals and a hook? That's almost exactly what I said earlier. What's the difference between React hooks and Angular hooks? That one could be interesting. So let's see here. Again, another LinkedIn one. It's going to the same article. So I know, okay, so if people are searching for this as well, I'm gonna get this result. This one seems like a really good one for me to write about. Just because we have LinkedIn, and remember if it's like a social media site, that's also like a good indicator. Reddit, oh man. Okay, so this is looking better and better. Angular answer to React hooks. I might read this and then see what they're talking about. But regardless, I'm seeing almost no articles. Here's one. Here's one. This one's Medium, right? So do I have to pay to read all of it? Maybe. Okay. So that's another one good one. If like it's hidden behind a paywall, you could write about it yourself, your expertise, add a different context to it, and maybe rank for it. So I would do this one as well, or at least this search. Where do you see that? I'm sorry. Where is it? Sorry. Okay. Okay. So like so maybe there's more updated information you could write about. So there's a lot of different like points of attack, so to speak, you could use here. Um, I might write about this one because this one seems like a gold nugget. Very cool. Okay. Let's do another one. We were talking about React. You said React state management? Or no, what did you say? You were talking about Redux, right? Okay. Okay. Right. Right. Well, right, and so that's true too. Is like you're gonna want to experiment and try and flesh out what your title is gonna be. There's some like best practices too. Like you don't want your title to be so long that people can't read it on something like this. Like this is a good length. Um, Reddit. Okay, there's some videos. That's good. JavaScript. So this is a scenario. Remember where I was saying where like sometimes you'll get articles or you get video content, and don't turn away from it. Like go into them and search and skim. Okay, so they're actually using a list here, which is cool. So this is probably over 1,000 words, but it looks like it's giving like a big list of content, which is fine. You could also take the approach of like, I've tried out these, and here's why I'm choosing this one, and give your opinion. So this could be a topic you write about. But I did see where's Reddit. So whenever I see that, even if there's articles underneath it, I want to find out why Reddit is number 2, and why is this article down here not number 2. So I might look into that and see if there's like content in the Reddit forum that isn't in this, and maybe try and identify different topics I could talk about. So okay, I know we're running low on time. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. I just wanted it to be an example of maybe talking out loud, trying to identify these different things, using helpful search phrases that we talked about to identify kind of different topics that we could write about. And then at that point, you would say, okay, let's write about signals versus React hooks, although don't take it, I'm gonna write about it. And then I might try and do a draft of a response post and say, here's my intro, I'm gonna bold that text, I'll write my main points, and then see if I can link between different content on my site. Yes? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so if you want to cross post, that's totally fine as well. I think we saw an example of that. Somebody had their blog and then they posted the same thing on LinkedIn. LinkedIn was actually outranking them, right? If you do that, and I haven't checked, but make sure that you set your canonical URL back to your own domain, right? That's super important, because then, like for example, on dev.to, if I wrote something and cross post on there, they have way higher domain rating than my website, right? And domain rating plays some significance here. And so if I don't set that canonical URL back to my domain, Google's going to think that the original place that I wrote that content was dev2. And so it's just going to outrank my content, right? So just make sure you do that. But I agree. And it's a great way to get other communities involved too, to like read your content. Like go on these like Hashnode or dev2. Medium also can be good, but to get other people involved. So, okay, let's kind of go back to the slides if I can find them. Uh-oh. Okay. Okay, chapter 5, delayed gratification and blog maintenance. All right, we're wrapping up, I promise. So delayed gratification, starting a blog from scratch requires a lot of diligence. Like you're gonna have to invest a decent amount of time to write content, to establish your authority, to provide helpful content. And for months and months, you'll actually see like almost no results from Google, right? You're building up that authority, which is good, but it can take anywhere from 5 to 8 months in my experience. I've done this 4 times now. 5 to 8 months before you see what we call like hockey stick growth, right? Which is you see nothing, and then all of a sudden, boom, you see this like uptick in results. And then usually from there, you'll just see like continual improvement as far as analytics go, assuming you're still adding content to your site, you're still providing helpful information. And then you go back, and what I'll talk about here in a minute is to revise content that's older as well. So maintaining your blog, after you've filled out and flushed out your 3 content buckets, unless you're some like content writing machine, which some of you are, I already know, you'll probably be doing this for like 8 months, 10 months, 12 months. And at that point, once you've done those 90 articles or 100 articles, it's a good opportunity to kind of step back and let Google tell you what's working and what's not working. What you might think is like your area of expertise, Google might say, actually, we're finding that there's a huge knowledge gap in this other content bucket that you're writing about, and we're promoting that more than these other content areas. And so you can go ahead and take a look at that and then write more content like that, right? Because you already know Google's loving it and they're serving it to people, it's providing value. So for articles that are doing well, identify those, write more articles in those categories, and then also find areas to write about that are closely related to that. You're gonna have, I already mentioned 3 content buckets, but that doesn't mean you have to stop at 3. You could add more if you want to as you fill out more information. And then for articles that are not maybe getting as much traffic as you want, it's a good opportunity to go back and maybe try adding more content. Maybe try adding some different media sources. In some cases, you might need to go ahead and tweak the actual topic slightly and see if you can hit on a different area. Go through the whole process of, for that query that you wrote about, do it on Google again and see if there's any new articles out there. What can you do? Be proactive about maintaining your blog as well. Okay, we're almost at time, but are there any other questions before I go through this slide? Yes.
Some examples of like content buckets. So you have 3 buckets of content all related to an Angular niche.
Yeah, absolutely. So I write a lot about Angular in general on my site, but a content bucket that I found is Angular testing. So writing unit tests specifically in Angular, or I mean, you can do unit testing, but I found that Google really likes to, for some reason, promote that content from my blog. And then talking about like component architecture and stuff is another area where I found some decent success on my blog. And so those might be, if like Angular is my niche, testing is a content bucket, and maybe architecture and things like that. Now, those could still be broken down even more, right? And so if you need to, you could actually dig deeper. I made the mistake of digging too deep after going too broad. So you'll be able to identify kind of based on what you're doing on Google and trying to find those topics, if you've kind of found that knowledge gap, and it might be a good way to, after you've collected a few of those queries and questions that you want to answer, to help you identify what that content bucket is supposed to be. Make sense? Yeah, great question. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, so yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have any statistics to support this, but I found just as a reader, it's easier for me to see multiple code blocks of the same piece of code, with each one kind of adding on to the next one. So if I'm writing out a function or I'm writing out a test, maybe the first code block is the actual skeleton of the test, and then I talk about it a little bit, and then I add another picture, and it's the actual assertion, right? And then I add another picture or another code block, and I kind of break it down that way versus just scroll through 100 lines of code. As a reader, I think it's easier, but I don't have any statistics necessarily to prove that that's better than just dumping a bunch of code in a code block. Yes. Oh, great question. Yeah, so the question is, if it takes anywhere from, in my experience, 5 to 8 months, sometimes a little bit longer, before you start seeing that hockey stick growth, how much time are you putting into your blog? And the answer is, I don't know. It depends on you, right? Everybody's different. I know, for example, my brother is like a really gifted writer, and so he'd probably just be able to like knock out things really quickly. It takes me more time to like digest information, learn, and then try and think of ways to present it to people. When I first started my blog, I was doing 2 articles per week. Okay. It took me about 6 months before I started seeing some articles take like spot number 2 or 3 on Google. And then as I continued more content, obviously I started doing a little bit better, but I start with 2. That's what I did, but it takes time and it's a lot of effort, right? Any other questions? Okay, I know we are almost at time, but thank you so much for joining me today. Feel free to connect with me online. I'm on Twitter. My blog is there. As you're on your way out, if you want, you can pick up these little packets. Again, just kind of like a roadmap of what we talked about today. Included some of those common phrases you can search for, and just kind of like a checklist if you want. If you're interested in the slides, you can scan the QR code. That'll take you to the slide deck. And yeah, I'll be up here for a little bit longer even afterwards if you want to talk or ask more questions. But thank you so much for joining me. I thought this was great. Hopefully it was insightful and valuable to you. And I hope we'll see each other around. And again, go check out the sponsors. They're really important. And I'm really glad that we're here again this year. And so it's a great opportunity to go thank them for supporting that conference. Cool. Thank y'all.